Hola people, story time. We're reading from Women Who Run with the Wolves, page 16. But they are not lost forever. I was given as a child many of what I know to be unvarnished and uncorrupted themes of the stories of Eld, many of which I bring to this work. But even story fragments as they exist today can foreshadow the shape of the entire story. I've poked about in what I playfully call fairy tale forensics and paleomythology, even though, as its heart, reconstruction is a long, intricate and contemplative endeavor. When such would be effective, I use various forms of exegesis, comparing leitmotifs, taking anthropological and historical inferences into account, and forms both new and old. This method in part reconstructs from ancient archetypal patternings learned through my years of training in analytical and archetypal psychology, which preserve and study all the motifs and plots in fairy tales, legends, and mythos in order to apprehend the instinctual lives of humans. I gain an assist from templates that lie in the imaginal worlds, the collective images of the unconscious, and those drawn up through dreams in non-ordinary states of consciousness. A final polish might be gained by comparing the story matrices with archaeological evidence from the ancient cultures themselves, such as ritual pottery, masks, and figurines. Simply put, in fairy tale locution, I spend much time ranking the ashes with my nose. I have been studying archetypal patterns for some 25 years in myths and fairy tales. In folklore from my familial cultures for twice as long. I have learned a vast body of knowledge about the bones of stories and know when and where the bones are missing in a story. Through the centuries, various conquests of nations by other nations and both peaceful and forced religious conversions have covered over or altered the original core of the old stories. But there is good news. For all the structural tumble down in existing versions of tales, there is a strong pattern that still shines forth. From the form and shape of the pieces and parts, it can be determined with good accuracy what has been lost from the story, and those missing pieces can be redrawn accurately, often revealing amazing understructures which begin to heal women's sadness that so much of the old mysteries has been destroyed. It is not quite so. They have not been destroyed. All that we might ever need is still whispering from the bones of story. Collecting the essence of stories is a constant paleontologic endeavor. The more story bones, the more likely the integral structure can be found. The more whole the stories, the more subtle twists and turns of the psyche are presented to us, and the better opportunity we have to apprehend and evoke our soul work. When we work the soul, she, the wild woman, creates more of herself. As a child, I was lucky to be surrounded by people from many of the old European countries and Mexico. Many members of my family, my neighbors and friends had recently arrived from Hungary, Germany, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Serbo-Croatia, Russia, Lithuania and Bohemia, as well as Jalisco, Michoacán, Juarez, and many of the aldeas, fronterizas, villages at the Mexico, Texas, Arizona borders. They and many others, Native Americans, people from Appalachia, Asian immigrants, and many African American families from the South came to farm, to pick, to work in the ash pits and steel mills, the breweries, and in domestic jobs. Most were not educated in the academic sense, yet they were intensely wise. They were the bearers of a valuable and almost pure oral tradition. Many of my family and neighboring people who surrounded me had survived forced labor camps, displaced person camps, deportation camps, and concentration camps, where the storytellers among them had lived a nightmare version of Scheherazade. Many had had their family lands taken, had lived in immigration jails, had been repatriated against their wills. From these rustic storytellers I first learned the tales people tell when life may turn to death and death may turn to life at any moment, because their transmissions to me were so filled with suffering and with hope. When I later grew old enough to read fairy stories printed in books, the latter seemed curiously starched and ironed flat in comparison. As a young adult, I migrated west toward the continental divide. I lived amidst loving Jewish, Irish, Greek, Italian, Afro-American, and Alsatian strangers who became kindred spirits and friends. I've been blessed to know some of the rare and old Latino communities from the southwestern USA, such as Trampas and Trujas, New Mexico. I was fortunate to spend time with Native American friends and relatives, from the Inuit in the north through the Pueblo and Plains peoples in the west to the Nahuas, Lacandones, Tehuanas, Huicoles, Seres, Maya Quiches, Maya Cachicueles, Mesquitos, Cunas, Nazca Quechuas, and Jivarros in Central and South America. I've traded stories with sister and brother healers at kitchen tables and under grape arbors, in hen houses and dairy barns, and while patting tortillas, tracking wildlife, and sewing the millionth cross stitch. I have been lucky to share the last bowl of chili, to sing with gospel women so as to raise the dead, and to sleep under stars in houses without roofs. I have sat down to the fire of dinner, or both, in Little Italy, Polish town, the hill country, Los Barrios, and other ethnic communities throughout the urban Midwest and Far West, and most recently traded stories about spirits, bad ghosts, with man-griot friends in the Bahamas. I have been double lucky that wherever I've gone, the children, the matrons, the men in their prime, and the old coots and crones, the soul artists, have crept out of the woods, jungles, meadows, and sandhills to regale me with caws and cavels, and I too to them. There are many ways to approach stories. The professional folklorist, the Jungian, Freudian, or other sort of analyst, the ethnologist, anthropologist, theologian, archaeologist, each has a different method, both in collecting tales and the use to which they are put. Intellectually, the way I developed my work with stories was through my training in analytical and archetypal psychology. For more than half a decade during my psychoanalytic education, I studied amplification of leitmotifs, archetypal symbology, word mythology, ancient and popular iconology, ethnology, world religions and interpretation. Viscerally, however, I come to stories as a cantadora. Keeper of the old stories, I come from a long line of tellers, Mesemondok, old Hungarian women who might as easily tell while sitting on wooden chairs with their plastic pocketbooks on their laps, their knees apart, their skirts touching the ground, or while wringing the neck of a chicken. In Cuentistas, old Latina women who stand robust of breast, hips wide, and cry out the story ranchera style. Both clans storytell in the plain voice of women who have lived blood and babies, bread and bones. For us, story is a medicine which strengthens and arights the individual and the community. Those who have taken on the responsibilities of this craft and are committed to the human behind the craft are direct descendants of an immense and ancient community of holy people, troubadours, bards, griots, cantadoras, cantors, traveling poets, bums, hags, and crazy people. I once dreamt I was telling stories and felt someone patting my foot in encouragement. I looked down and saw that I was standing on the shoulders of an old woman who was steadying my ankles and smiling up at me. I said to her, No, come, stand on my shoulders, for you are old and I am young. No, she insisted, this is the way it is supposed to be. I saw that she stood on the shoulders of a woman far older than she, who stood on the shoulders of a woman even older, who stood on the shoulders of a woman in robes, who stood on the shoulders of another soul, who stood on the shoulders. I believed the old dream woman about the way it was supposed to be. The nurture for telling stories comes from the might and endowment of my people who have gone before me. In my experience, the telling moment of the story draws its power from a towering column of humanity joined one to the other across time and space, elaborately dressed in the rags and robes of nakedness of their time, and filled to the bursting with life still being lived. If there is a single source of story and the noument of story, this long chain of humans is it. The story is far older than the art and science of psychology, and will always be the elder in the equation, no matter how much time passes. One of the oldest ways of telling, which intrigues me greatly, is the passionate trance state, wherein the teller senses the audience, be it audience of one or of many, and then enters a state in the world between worlds, where a story is attracted to the trance teller and told through her. The trance teller calls on El Duende, the wind that blows soul into the faces of listeners. A trance teller learns to be psychically double-jointed through the meditative practice of story, that is, training oneself to undo certain psychic gates and ego apertures in order to let the voice speak, the voice that is older than the stones. When this is done, the story may take any trail, be turned upside down, be filled with porridge and dumped out for a poor person's feast, be filled with gold for the taking, or chase the listener into the next world. That teller never knows how it will all come out, and that is at least half of the moist magic of the story. This is a book of tellings about the ways of the wild woman archetype. To try to diagram her, to draw boxes around her psychic life, would be contrary to her spirit. To know her is an ongoing process, a lifelong process, and that is why this work is an ongoing work, a lifelong work. So here are some stories to apply to yourself as soul vitamins, some observations, some map fragments, some little pieces of pine pitch for fastening feathers to trees to show the way, and some flattened underbrush. The underground world, our psychic home. Stories set the inner life into motion, and this is particularly important where the inner life is frightened, wedged, and cornered. Story greases the hoist and pulleys. It causes adrenaline to surge, shows us the way out, down or up, and for our trouble. Cuts for us fine white doors in previously blank walls, openings that lead to the dreamland, that lead to love and learning, that lead us back to our own real lives as knowing wildish women. That's it for today. Love you very much. See you tomorrow.